It's super exciting. So yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Today, we're really excited to have another one of these Battery MBA / Battery Associates panels. Really big welcome to everyone joining us on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. So I can see the notifications. We are live. So yeah, really big welcome. Feel free to put in the chat where you're calling in from. Would love to see that. We know we have quite a global audience, so please put in the chat where you're calling in from and also maybe what you're excited for this panel. And before we're going to get started, I'm just going to have a quick few slides. I promise they're very, very short, to just give a quick overview of why we're all here before we go to the reason why we're all here, which are these fantastic 4 panelists we have with us. We're really excited to introduce them shortly. So let me quickly start the recording and the slides. Fantastic. Okay, and a really big welcome everyone for our 5th BatteryMBA Roundtable. We really love to do them. We have had quite a few in the past, and I can really say this panel we have today is one of these really exciting ones again, because we've gotten a fantastic lineup. We see here Rebecca Gordon, CEO of CRU Consulting, is with us. We have Lars Karlström, founder and CEO of Itervolt and Statevolt. We have Paul Charles, CEO and President of American Battery Factory, and Christy Disney-Bruckner, Senior Policy Advisor from IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Association. So you can see we've got a really exciting lineup. Before we're going to get started with all of them, and I cannot wait, I'm just going to show you, I think, 3-4 slides just quickly of who we are. Who are we presenting this? Really quick, Battery Associates, which is the organization you probably, if you're on LinkedIn right now, you can also see the live stream from. Our mission is to create a sustainable world through the power of people and battery innovation. And so we love to bring people together from around the world around this really important topic of batteries. We do this in different ways. We have our Battery EDU, which is our educational and training part, or like our pillar of training education, which is the Battery MBA program from. We do a range of other training programs as well, which are developed right now. We have Battery Pro, where we're advising governments and companies on a range of different battery topics. We have our Battery Lab, where we do hardware and software development related to batteries, and we really try to also create more open source hardware and software in the sector. And just one quick slide about the Battery MBA, because there's a lot of people here on the call on the Zoom. There's all these fantastic participants of our 5th cohort, really spreading the entire world. We had now participants from over 30 countries, representing a range of different organizations. I'm going to show you a few in a second. And it's a 12-week program. So this is the last week for them. So we're super stoked for them. They have done really well. We have had lots of really fascinating exchanges over the 12 weeks. And yeah, it's all CBD accredited. And we've got over 120 alumni from 30 plus countries. And if anybody of you wants to join, feel free to join us in September for the next cohort. These are just some of the organizations we have represented in this Battery MBA program. We're super excited to have them all with us. So you can see a lot of different stakeholders from production, from mining, from recycling, from policy. So a really fantastic cohort. And they're all really excited to hear from this fantastic panelists we have now. You can find a testimony alumni on the website. If you just go on there, you'll find them there. So lots of interesting people. And yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch if you want to learn anything more about it. But now let's really get to the actual slides. Because today, there's a lot of things in the battery universe we're talking about. We hear a lot of news, and I'm really excited that we actually have some people with us who I think often in the news and some of the work. So that's really fantastic to see. And today we want to hear from them and hear their perspectives of the future of batteries, what are the topics they care about, and then hopefully have a really engaging discussion as well between these fantastic stakeholders. And I think our idea was to start with Rebecca, because she has some fantastic slides to just kick us off, to get us thinking on this important topic. So give me just 1 second. Rebecca, would you like to share? Otherwise, I'm happy to share it for you.
I can share if that's easier.
Let's do that. If you have it ready, then let me just quickly...
Yeah, I do. Let me just pop it up. So I should be on top of this. And I was going to ask how to change my slides over, so that's good.
Fantastic. Let's do it this way.
All right, where's it gone?
And please, everyone here on the LinkedIn live stream, feel free to keep putting in the chat where you're calling from, and maybe also any questions you already have. Now some of our panelists. So if you already have any questions you would like to ask, feel free to do so already? Because we know from experience, these questions going to fill up very quickly. Fantastic.
You see that?
Yes, we see it.
I will try and go back to the first slide. Participants can now see my screen. Super. Apologies. I can't see what you can see for some reason.
We can see your slide, no problem. We see the content slide.
I was hoping to get the introduction slide.
We get there in a second.
There we go. There we go. I'm in business.
Over to you.
Good. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. It's a great pleasure to be involved with this. It's my second time. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to give a slight bit of sort of background and general view of the market. So CRU is a metals and mining research house. We've got an analysis division that produces very authoritative data and analysis on the metal markets. My division, which is a consulting division, helping answer clients' questions. And we also have an events team who run some really big conferences around the world, particularly World Copper, every year. So that's us. Normal legal stuff, I managed to squash it, but this is confidential. So summary, the main things I want to talk about, these come from our battery metals market outlook, which we publish quarterly. So the 4 key themes I want to touch on is that the actual sales of automotives has really been quite hard hit by the war in Ukraine, and also the challenges, particularly the lockdown in Shanghai. But we are still seeing quite a lot of investment from China, both internally and with money from China, in gigafactories and battery capacity around the world. So the investment is continuing. It's continuing in different ways. So we're seeing quite a lot of regionalization, and the money is actually going into creating end-to-end supply chains in different geographic regions. And I'll just do a highlight on the US market there so we can have a think about that. And then I'll just run through one slide on each of the main commodities to show you the key challenges in each of those. And that will be my time. So this is our forecast for automotive markets, again, from the battery metals market outlook, just showing that this quarter we've really fallen a little bit behind where we thought we would be when we wrote the forecast in March. It's due to supply constraints around the world, obviously the war in Ukraine, lockdowns in China, but also some of the component production like semiconductors is just holding back production in some of those main producing regions. As you can see, Eastern Europe has fallen back. The supply chain production is detrimental effect is expected to continue. So you'd think it was just small changes, you'd actually get quite a big kick back up again. But we see that persisting certainly through the next 3 or 4 years as that ripples through the markets and people sort of realign their expectations and their supply chains to the new world order. So that really is quite a long-term effect from our point of view. So what does that mean for people putting money into the battery supply chain? So we've actually had a huge increase in the amount of capacity that's been announced in the battery supply chains over the last 6 months. We think the potential capacity by 2030 is well over 450,000 terawatt hours. And that is an increase on about 43% since the last forecast we put out 3 months ago. And it has the potential to grow at an astounding rate out into the period to 2030. Capacity utilization, though, isn't quite going to run so well. So on the bottom chart, you can see the demand, which is the grey bar, sitting on top of our operating and under construction capacity. And then other planned capacity, which is things that have been announced but not started. So we have a lesser degree of certainty in them actually being built. And you can see on the dotted lines what we think the capacity would be, utilization would be if everything that's been announced was brought online, and if everything that's operating and under construction was brought online. So we need everything. By 2030, we need absolutely everything that's already operating and that's already under construction. But if you look at the amount of other capacity that's been talked about in the market, it would keep utilization rates of the whole fleet of those plants quite low. So only around 55%, which is surely sub-economic, which does suggest that not all of the plans that people have talked about to date will come to fruition in the period, but that overall we do have enough capacity in the market to keep production going at the levels needed. The top chart shows a little bit about the changes in capacity forecasts by region, and you can see that really strong growth in the Chinese capacity, so likely to be exporting either in cars or as sales from China. So what does that mean in terms of regionalization? I took out the chart on nickel in Indonesia, just for the interest of time. It is quite interesting what's happening in Indonesia in terms of that development of the nickel supply chain. But let's focus on North America. And here we're starting to see the chains coming together with all the different players participating in the market. And I'm sure my American colleagues on this call will have more to say about these supply chains as they're evolving. It goes right the way from the raw materials. So you're starting to see cobalt sulfate coming into the market, capacity coming into the market that will enable end-to-end supply chains to be built. You've got people building the chemicals, the precursors, and the cells. POSCO, you've got LG coming in, building the cells, in some cases in partnership with the automotive companies. So this is quite a change in the market from where we were before with all that capacity back in China. And you'll need to see changes in the flows of the raw materials to support this new capacity coming online. So the individual commodities. So lithium, subject of great interest at the moment due to the price spike. And we have seen a dramatic uptick in production capacity announcements over the last year. So we've got an 85% increase in the announcements, particularly in Australia, of capacity. And you can see here who's likely to come into the market through this year and to the end of the year. So a vast amount of investment, capital investment, time investment. But the really important thing here is that the speed at which these mines can respond. So we had some brownfield expansions. You also had some that were sitting on care and maintenance. And the market responded really quickly to the price signals that came in terms of the capacity. And you're getting this new material coming through. So overall, you've got quite an expansion in terms of total capacity over the next 3 years. And you can see here the investments we're considering along the bottom here, including some other, to make the capacity go from around 480,000 tonnes per year, lithium carbonate equivalent last year, up to just over 1 million in 3 years' time. So almost exceeding a doubling in capacity over that period, with, as I say, quite a speed of response to the local recent price signals. If we go into cobalt, more complicated market, you can see the dominance here of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I'm sure everyone has heard about in terms of their issues with the S of ESG. We have got an expanding share coming out of Indonesia. That's a byproduct of the nickel processes. Previously, it was exported in the concentrates, but is beginning to be extracted inside Indonesia. And you can start to see those volumes increasing. And then quite problematic is the volume of metal that has been coming out of Russia. So now we have Norilsk facing sanctions. And actually, if you divided this picture up between what was going into the car industry in terms of cobalt chemicals and what was going into all the other markets, which are not the subject for today, but are critically important. So jet engines, super alloys, prosthetic hips, all the other applications of cobalt metal. The Russian material is one of the major producers of that metal. So the price signals you might see in cobalt coming up are more likely to be related to tightening in the cobalt metal market than necessarily in the cobalt sulfate market. So you can see we've still got quite a lot of growth coming from other countries. You've got growth from individual companies as well as different regions, small increase in the US in response to that supply chain end-to-end investment. But in the longer term, we probably still need a bit more investment in that market. In terms of the metals, every single turbine blade needs cobalt in it, and the higher temperature you run your turbines at to make them more energy efficient and less carbon emitting, the more cobalt you need. So there is a tension on both sides of this market, metal and chemical. So finally, nickel. This is just the Chinese nickel sulfate production in country, and it starts to drop off through this year, and largely as a result of increased production in Indonesia, which is Chinese money has gone into. So not necessarily as difficult a story as it looks, but China domestic production beginning to just drop away after many consecutive months of increase in terms of production. So I'm just going to go to the conclusion slide really quickly. Since our update early in the year, a few changes. We still have really high raw material prices. So the price of cobalt, lithium, nickel all sit at our highest highest banding at CRU, where this year will be at least 15% higher than last year on average for the whole year. So still challenging for consumers. We think that the supply chain constraints and regionalization will be more of a problem. So we're seeing challenges in shipping, challenges in moving materials around, challenges in building plants because of access to equipment, and also the regionalization getting stronger. So the need to build more plants in different places growing. You're getting more people spending money through the chain. So particularly this US legislation that mandates entire chains outside of China. If you think about rare earths, for example, you're beginning to see people spending money right the way through. But the other example is the automotive companies looking right the way back to the mines to guarantee the material coming through. In terms of the chemistries, partly through those price signals, but also with installed capacity, LFP, lithium iron phosphate, is going to keep a place in the market in automobiles. And have a differentiation from the higher range nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. So at one point, it was the end of lithium iron phosphate, but no, both have a place and both chemistries will continue. And we still think that the EV sales will grow strongly despite that slight decline. And that will drive through the entire battery market because mobile devices and some of the other high cobalt batteries are becoming, with the economic downturn, sales are beginning to pull away. We think the investment in gigafactories will strongly support the electrification and the electric vehicle strategies of the major car manufacturers, although they won't always own them. It might be in partnerships. And finally, the COVID lockdowns in China have caused that market turbulence in terms of the availability of pieces, maybe pushing that supply chain regionalization a bit more strongly. People are more aware. But we don't think overall it will affect demand too much over the coming period. So that was it from me. Please do reach out if you've got any questions about energy transition, these materials used in battery, how the supply chains might work. My team would be delighted to talk to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I think also a great overview and great, I think, starting point for I think the ongoing discussion we're going to have. But maybe next we can go to Christy and talk a bit more on this ESG. You already, point on the S, and I think all the other ESG parts are important as well. So let me maybe quickly start a presentation for you, Christy. Maybe that works for you.
Terrific.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm so impressed by the audience. So I look forward to our discussion and hope that as many of you as possible can stay on to participate in Q&A and discussion with us. I'm Christy Disney-Bruckner, Senior Policy Advisor at the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA. And we'll just give you a brief overview of who we are, and we can talk more about specific aspects of our standard and assurance process and why this is important for the battery sector. So we started in 2006, and we can move to the next slide, in response to concerns around where do raw materials that go into different products, including jewelry, was an early focus of IRMA. Where do they come from? And what does responsible sourcing mean? And developed a shared vision based on over a decade of multi-stakeholder dialogue. And it led to the IRMA standard for responsible mining. But our vision is a world where the mining sector respects human rights, the aspirations of affected communities, provides safe, healthy, and supportive workplaces, minimizes harm to the environment, and leaves positive legacies. A lot of the focus in IRMA right now is for battery materials for EVs. And our mission is to protect people and the environment directly affected by mining, and to do this by creating financial value for mines that are independently verified to achieve best practices. And I'll talk more about what this means. On the next slide, gives you a little bit of an idea how IRMA functions. We have a standard that includes a set of best practices for the mining sector. And this standard covers over 26 topics, over 400 requirements for a mine site. And again, it's so important to the integrity of IRMA that this standard was developed through a multi-stakeholder process engaging directly affected communities, labor, NGOs, mining companies, also purchasing companies, investors, and others to inform development of the standard and to maintain IRMA as an institute and as we continue to improve our standards and assurance process. Also important is that the way that we create impact at a mine site level and in supply chains is through use of independent third-party audits. A big concern among civil society, investors, and others right now for raw materials, including for battery materials, is there a mine site level audit? Are we getting information that's verified through third-party assurance? Because what we don't want to do is promote any form of greenwashing, but really to drive continuous improvement and public access to information that comes through making audit reports, detailed audit reports available to you and to the public. On the next slide, it gives you a bit of more detail what the chapters and the IRMA standard for responsible mining cover. And you'll see there a wide range of topics. There are levels of heightened focus on some topics over others from year to year. You know, one we see a lot of focus on right now is understandably and importantly is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But our standard takes a very holistic lens looking at how do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also make sure at the same time we're protecting the rights of indigenous communities, impacts on water resources and biodiversity, labor rights, human rights due diligence. We don't want to focus so much on one of these chapters that we start to lose our focus on the others, but really need to look at the social, economic, environmental issues in a really holistic way. And that's what the detail of the IRMA standard does. On the next slide, you can see a bit more of some, this isn't a comprehensive list, but you'll see some of the international standards and frameworks that are reflected in the IRMA standard for responsible mining, because we know that aligning with international standards and good practices is very important to our standard. And in the next slide, just gives a bit of an idea of some of the really core parts of our system that continue to maintain our integrity and help us continue to maintain trust across all sectors. One is that our certification system is for a wide range of industrial scale mines. So mines anywhere can participate. We are applicable to all mines materials with few exceptions. We don't cover energy fuels such as uranium, thermal coal, oil sands. We don't cover deep seabed mining right now. And we're focused at the mine site level to give that very local level understanding of the impacts and how a mine site is improving over time. And mines at any level of performance can participate in the system and start where they're at and show continuous improvement over time. We're a high bar standard, and we understand that mines will not be IRMA 100 right away in most cases, but we're showing where a mine is at, how they're improving from one audit to the next. And in the next slide, you can see the different achievement levels. Any mine can self-assess against the IRMA standard for responsible mining. This is a first step to any audits, but a mine site that's only self-assessing cannot make any public claims or statements about IRMA. But this is a first step that is very accessible for any mine site to participate. The next step, and what we really want to get mines into the IRMA system to do, is engaging in independent third-party audits so that you can access information. The different achievement levels range from transparency, just showing where that mine site is at, to meeting 50, 75, or 100% of the requirements in the standard for responsible mining. Only IRMA 100 can say, as a mine site, they're IRMA certified. So just a couple more points as I wrap up. In the next slide, we are, the uptake in IRMA is really increasing exponentially. And one reason for that is the level of trust that IRMA has garnered from civil society, labor unions, directly affected communities, because we're unique in being a multi-stakeholder governed standard that gives each sector engaged in our governance equal voting rights. But you can see here countries and materials where we are seeing the increasing uptake in the IRMA standard. We do have 2 audits of lithium sites underway right now, and I can talk with you more as well about the companies that are engaged in IRMA. So, some of our newest members are automobile companies. So right now we have BMW, Mercedes, Ford, GM, VW, Tesla engaged in the IRMA system. And we're also seeing expansion to energy companies. So Ørsted is a newer member, and we're excited to see that growth in IRMA. So in the next slide, it's just one of many examples of how NGOs are calling on governments, on companies, on purchasing companies and mine sites to engage in the IRMA system. And the next slide, and a key focus of my work with IRMA, is to work with governments. IRMA is not a replacement for governments in any way, but we collaborate with governments to look at IRMA as a set of best practices and look at how legal frameworks can be improved to incorporate those best practices. Conducting a type of gap analysis is one example of what governments can do in calling on companies to engage in the IRMA system. And finally, we can move on to the last slide. Our system is evolving to go beyond mine site standards and audits to we have a draft mineral processing standard that we're finalizing, as well as a standard for exploration and development, and a chain of custody standard as well that is helping link our standards to end users. So I'm happy to talk with you more about how that's evolving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. And I think it was a very important intervention as well in some way on the mineral side and how we comply, with the ESG for those and make it a sustainable transition overall. And I think next we have Lars, kind of giving a bit of a different perspective on gigafactories.
Yes, thank you, and happy to be here with you all today. And we developing a gigafactory in Italy, and it's actually a very big one. As you see from the picture here, the rendering here, this is our 300,000 square meter Pininfarina designed production facility, which is based in Scarmagno outside Torino, and at an excellent location with a massively good logistics and also access to green energy and a number of features, which is extremely good for building a factory like this. So I think you can go for the next slide, maybe. Yes, here you have some key numbers, what we're up to do. And we are targeting 45 gigawatt production capacity. And something I would like to mention here, we are intended to go in production early 2025. And but for sure, it's not going to be 45 gigawatt at a time, maybe 6. And that goes for all the other initiatives also in Europe, and which means that the capacity will not be as high as in many times may be anticipated from all the announcements being made now, especially here in Europe. And that means that demand for batteries is going to be massively big in the next 10 to 15 years. It's going to be huge. And I see a shortage of battery cells in the way like we see for semiconductors right now. I think it's going to be a huge demand for it. And for sure, many are saying, okay, we can buy our battery cells from China, but I mean, transporting heavy things doesn't make it sustainable, really. So it's I think that's not a good option. So therefore, we need to accelerate our supply chains and our development of these factories in Europe as well. The capex of these factories are very high. As we have a capex of 3.4 billion euros, and it's a massive amount of money for sure. The good news is there are a lot of funds available on the market for these type of investments currently, and also governments are pushing very hard for it. So it's a good environment, even if you see a downturn in the economy right now globally. As I foresee that the new green industrialization still will be supported strongly going forward. So it's a good time to be in, and also the greatest opportunity in 100 years to be a part of a totally new industrialization, which is an amazing time, I must say. And I recommend many entrepreneurs to step into this space going forward. We need you all. We will hire up to 3,000 people, depending on what scenario now we're choosing. In a high automation scenario, will be less people employed, but the impact of the area where these factories will be built of this capacity means around 10,000 new jobs. So the social impact and the job creation is massive for these type of investments. They change totally the society. In our case, in Scarmagno, which is a former site of Olivetti, they have been totally in a decline since 1992, and this will actually change the whole society. We change the whole northern Italy actually when it comes to the opportunity of job creation and make a social impact as well. And that's one of our most important part, is actually to be supporting the social the society and make it happen and make a change for real action. This is something you can do with this type of investment, these type of factories. We talked about the production size, which is huge. This brings us to the 10th largest footprint in the world, and so it's a huge. It's like the Wolfsburg factory in Volkswagen factory in Wolfsburg. So it's huge. We're also going to build an R&D center later on in the area for developing our own batteries. We are currently licensing our technology, and we'll be going forward. We will be developing our own products as well. You can go for the next slide if you have it there. Here you see our location, which is in the northern part of Italy as mentioned. And you can see clearly we have access both ports and also the most important, we have access to a number of very important markets like Germany and France. But the most important for us for sure is the Italian market, where we have Stellantis, we have a number of players actually in the automotive industry. Italy will be unfortunately hit badly by the transition from combustion engine to EVs, as we have a big part of the supply chain for combustion engines are actually in the northern part of Italy, and this will probably impact us very badly. We will see here 60 to even 100,000 jobs going lost in this region, and that will for sure be difficult to repair in the short term. But these type of investments will for sure help. And the good news for us is that we have access to a very qualified workforce compared to our friends in the northern part of Europe, where we have a different climate and we have a different structure on competence. We are really blessed to be here going forward. So for us, it's a very interesting part to be in, where we have access to very, very important infrastructure and for workforce. So it's so there's a very good place to be at, I must say. So we are very happy for it. Next slide. Yes, we have our approach here. We are actually building 8 production lines. Each production line is 6 gigawatt. This means that a production line is more like a building. So it's actually 8 buildings more or less. And what we're doing here is that we are targeting an NMC technology, and so each and every this line will be accommodating. The good thing is we can actually produce multiple technologies within our factory, and that means that we can also targeting not just fast charging technology for high performance, also base technology, and also even implement cells for storage, for instance. So it's a very interesting engineering way. And I would like to say that building these factories are very, very complicated and create a lot of how should I say, gray hairs, as we are in great need of high engineering competence. And very few of these have been built. And therefore, it's a very complex engineering process that we need to have a number of collaboration partner to make this happen. We have in our team ABB, ACOM, Equans, and a number of these competent engineering companies are supporting this process highly. What I would like to say also is that the supply chain is probably one of our hardest, how should I say, topics, and something we need to work very hard with here in Europe. We have difficulties with a number of supply, like minerals, but not just minerals, also a number of topics which actually are difficult to obtain in Europe currently, and we need support from governments. We need support from a number of areas to make all this happen, and we are working very hard on this. We are just launched a collaboration with Politecnico University in Milano, who are supporting the process of identifying these areas. We also know that 95% of all rare earth minerals are currently in China, and that's something we need to change. And the only one who can change it is more or less governments actually who can support this process for making this happen. And so that's something which is for sure difficult and are being addressed. And so there are a number of topics that we need to overcome. Also, I would like to point out something else. Going full electric for the industry, for for the EV fleet. We'll also we also need to look into the energy space for sure. Make sure that we have enough green energy to support this transition. And this is going to be difficult because we are already in an energy crisis. And what's happening now in Ukraine, for instance, we also see that we in Italy have a problem with 40% of all natural gas comes from Russia and has to be replaced. So we're also looking into opportunities for ourselves, as we also are digesting up to 1% of all energy in Italy for this factory single. So it's a high consumer of energy. And we're looking into opportunities now in the geothermal space also, where we can play a role. Italy is one of the countries in the world where you have a massive amount of geothermal resources, which can actually benefit a lot from it. But there are still some legislations and these type of things that has to be overcome. So a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges for sure to make all this happen in a short period of time. And as you know, everything is going in an extremely fast pace currently. So it's going to be demanding, but as said, a lot of opportunities. We are for sure following all the ESG standards. We are in this program. We are following every bits and piece of it, and are working very hard to be a fully ESG compliant company. And there's also challenges in this space, but we're doing our best. I mean, a gigafactory or a battery production is not really an automotive industry. It's actually a chemistry industry, to be honest. And therefore we have a lot of things, a lot of topics that has to be addressed in this space as well. We can go next, see what we have. Yes, here is some of our journey so far. Well, this has been going very fast. Actually, I established British Volt in the UK in 2019, and that company is currently well on with starting the construction of the factory. So it has been a very fast journey for them. I'm no longer a part of British Volt. I sold my shares there last year, and reinvested it in Italy. And where we are in a good pace currently, we are applying for building permits. Unfortunately, the process in Italy is a bit lengthy. We have managed to reduce it, but we expect to have building permits early next year, and we will start the construction as soon as we can. So that's the only thing that are stopping us currently. I think the rest here is, yeah, we also actually established a project in California now, which is called State Volt. We're using all the things we learned from this project, we can now implement in the US. So we can actually accelerate the process over there in a totally different pace, as we have all the engineering process being done and know exactly how to do things in a way we didn't know before, because this is the most complex part. It's actually, I mean, a factory itself it's not just a shell, it's not just a logistic property, it's a factory that need to last through explosions and fires. So it's highly advanced, and the building itself is almost €1 billion. So it's a very expensive part, just the shell itself. So it's an advanced building, put it that way. I think we can go next. I don't bore you with all the things here. We have some timeline here. This has been stretching a bit now, so we will be in production early 25 instead of late 24. So we have made some adjustment here, which has not been shown here on this graph, but it's as said, the engineering process is extremely demanding and by far a lot more complex than anyone can ever imagine. So it's a difficult task just to implement these factories also. So it's a small wonder, the whole thing. Here is the ESG standards that we are trying to follow or will follow. And that's something I know that many of you are very familiar with, but there's a lot of good things in this also, and it's needed to be really into this part, as this is what the whole transition is about. If we don't follow and doing this in a proper way, the whole thing is meaningless. It's not just a greenwash we're talking about. We're talking to do things in the right way, and this is very important guidance to make sure that we are on the right path and making all this happen in the right way and making a real change, because otherwise we're just moving also problems from one place to another. So it's very important. That's why I also mentioned to you before regarding the China and Asia capacity of batteries, and also from terms of minerals. We need to have, I mean, a gigafactory is local. It should supply the need for batteries locally, because it's heavy stuff and we cannot transport it far. It makes a great impact on the environment if we are disregarding these things. So we should not import batteries from China or Asia or far away. They should be used on their domestic markets, and we should do the same here. We should produce batteries for our market. That's it. Here we have some of our collaboration partners currently. I mentioned a few of them before, and they are very important and very skilled, and have made all this happen for us. Without them, it would not have been possible to obtain what we've done so far. And it's a very complex process, and something we are very proud of to being able to achieve, and something we can also now duplicate with a blueprint on new markets, like I mentioned now, California. The interesting thing with the project in California in State Vault is that we are teaming up with a company called CTR, and they are actually digesting geothermal energy and lithium at the actual site for our gigafactory over there, which means that we can have a hyper-local concept where we have both lithium and energy at site. So that's a very unique opportunity. I think that's the only gigafactory in the world that have lithium and energy at site for the production. So that's a very, very unique opportunity. I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Here's the beautiful factory, and which Pin and Farina have designed in a very cool way. Actually, we like it a lot ourselves. So it's so this will be in place in early 25, and it will be not just a factory, it will be something that we will be very proud of. We're also focusing a lot on education with the Battery Academy for the young kids, and give them a chance to obtain a degree or being the future workers for the factory. So we are targeting a number of things in the educational sector as well. Thank you all, and I look forward to questions later on.
Thanks so much, Lars. And yeah, let's go straight to Paul, interest of time.
Great. Rebecca, Christy, Lars, fascinating presentations, wonderful data on this. So thank you so much for what you presented. American Battery Factory is focused on enabling countries to be energy independent. Next slide, please. We're standing up the first network of safe, modular lithium iron phosphate cell gigafactories on a global basis. We state global, however, we do believe very strongly in that these gigafactories need to be decentralized and really sized and located based upon what the local support, the local economies and the customers can support with that. We want to make sure that we're reducing the actual transport of the cells to end customers on that. And we also want to make sure that there is local support there. One of the key issues you've seen, at least in the States here, are very large gigafactories that are announced, 100 gig or perhaps even larger, but then they require 10 to 11 even larger quantities of employees. And in a rural environment, at least in the States, that's a very challenging situation to do. And so with a geographically decentralized modular approach, and taking it one step further into a pod or a facility that can be replicated and templated, we believe that it really allows for more gigafactories to be placed in locations that traditionally would not be even considered. Our pods or modules are between 3 and 5 gigawatts in terms of annual production. And our sweet spot is usually between 3 and 15 gigs, but frankly, we can scale to any size that the local area really can support. And that also includes power capability, as has been mentioned before. That's one of the challenges on a global basis. These factories do require a lot of power. Our factories are highly automated, very robotic. We also are transitioning the entire supply chain from China, initially to the US, and then we'll be going out into other countries as well too. The vertical integration is a very key element of this, as is the ESG focus. In our factories, you'll be seeing technologies and applications that frankly are not used in any other factories globally, which have much more of a humanitarian perspective associated with this, for instance, with solvents that don't cause birth defects and things of that nature. We will be announcing shortly our first headquarters and R&D center of foundry that will also be located with our initial gigafactory. We will be announcing multiple factories in the not too distant future as well too. Let me speak briefly about the foundry, and this is something that we believe is very important. There's wonderful technologies all over the world that frankly just haven't been scaled. This is essentially one of the key ways of scaling technologies, at least in the battery sector, is to be able to put those into gigafactories. And for that, for the most part, you really need to go to China. So what the foundry will do, it'll be based in the States, and it'll allow us to take technologies which have been proven to a bench or laboratory level, where you're making a handful of units. And in our foundry will be approximately 1/3 of a gigawatt facility, full production equipment, and will allow us to turn it on and turn it off to be able to scale technology so you can actually then place it into various gigafactories on a global basis. Our factories will employ between 300 and 1,000 jobs, obviously more if we go to larger size facilities. Next slide, please. In terms of our market focus, we do have a much broader perspective than just electric vehicles. We really believe that the backbone of this EV revolution is really in the grid systems. And at least in the States, it definitely needs to be optimized. It's an old system that's worked quite well over the years, but as we transition into this new age here, it will need much more resiliency. It'll need much more capacity. And so our cells are really focused to be in an optimum environment for energy storage, whether it's in a home system, whether it's in a commercial system, a resident or industrial system, or even to the grid level on that. We will be producing cells which are more on the energy aspect of this, and they're also geared to last 30 years. In the States, you have a 30-year mortgage when you purchase a house. We want our batteries to be right along there for the full 30 years as well. The second area, as I mentioned, is electric vehicles, and on LFP, it works quite well in buses and trains and lorries and the like as well. And then in the US, the US government requires that the military and the government purchase cells that do not come from China. And so this will enable a local support or local source and to be supportive with those particular efforts. And what I've found as I've traveled around the world is the US is not unique in this aspect. Every country in the world truly wants to have energy independence and the ability to have that localized supply chain, and also to be able to access technologies which are relevant, which are current, and which can be deployed in country is of utmost importance to many local manufacturers. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on our company here. We've been in a very quiet mode for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, and just recently we've announced what our plans and our intentions are, and the response has really been phenomenal, not just in North America, but truly on a global basis. One of our recent hires is James Herberman, and he's heading up our manufacturing, 30 years of experience from Duracell, making 12 million cells a day, to Saft, and then most recently from Tesla, helping to scale up the recently announced cell over there. The key thing I really want people to understand on this is that, yes, it is very difficult to get qualified people that actually understand the design, the manufacturing, and the scaling of battery technologies, but they are out there. And as Lars has mentioned, it's very important that we build this environment in which we're fostering and encouraging a constant stream of new people to be brought into the industry. We have an apprenticeship program that's based upon the Swiss model as well. Next slide, please. Part of our modularized approach is also a rapid construction approach. And we use a technology which is really quite interesting. It's never really been used in the battery sector per se, but in almost every other sector, it seems. It's a tension membrane technology that's been used, bottom left-hand corner, for instance, the blue building there, that's Blue Origin's building. And literally from dirt to moving in was an 11-month process with that. Our facilities, as I said, are going to be modular in design. This technology, the structure itself can be built in a factory here in Utah or actually up in Canada and other locations in the world. So a 500,000 square foot facility can literally be constructed in 10 weeks and it can be stood up on site in 10 weeks. They're highly insulated, super efficient. These are airtight chambers as well too. They can sustain 180 mile an hour winds, and that's on a sustained basis. Seismic rated. They're a third to 50% cheaper than traditional construction, and there's no waste at the site itself. Next slide, please. Where we stand in the food chain here is really the midstream. We'll be producing in-house our cathode materials. We also will be purchasing in North America and working with an anode production provider on that. With those two items alone, we'll have a control of over 50% of our costs. One other thing I do want to mention is that the materials necessary in order to build cells, at least in North America, are here. The challenge is they frankly just haven't been scaled up. And one aspect that we think is really important in the US as well as in countries around the world is look to other manufacturers in country or in the region that have manufacturing capabilities that may be able to pivot or be able to expand out their current offering. And that's what we've done with the automobile industry here in North America. We found companies that truly understand what it means to produce componentry in large volume, which have a path for cost reduction, ESG centric, and would like to be able to expand out their businesses as well. So we've been able to partner with some companies like that have really allowed us to move our supply chain transition, or the onshoring or the reshoring, in an expedited fashion. We're projecting in the next 36 months, we'll have our entire supply chain here in the US. So once again, having the supply chain here, we manufacture just the cells. We do not compete with our customers, and these are pack integrators and solution providers. We frankly provide them with a lot of business opportunities out there. We're kind of like Switzerland. I'd had an office there for a number of years, and we want to make sure we're very good at what we do. And we're focused on prismatic LFP cells initially. We'll be expanding out into some other areas, but we want to have large volume, which will allow us to keep our costs, which will be very competitive with China. And we do have a path to actually be more cost competitive than China as well. Next slide, please. The opportunity to have these modular designs for a factory really allow us to have something which we call a factory in a box. It's about 600 to 700 shipping containers that show up to a greenfield site, and we're literally able to stand up the building, have the equipment come out of that, and create a gigafactory in a very reduced time compared to traditional construction essentially anywhere in the world. Next slide, please. And the last thing I'll briefly chat about here is lithium iron phosphate. I'm sure the audience is quite familiar with this, but there was a mention early on, I think by Rebecca, that talked about even LFP. Yes, you know, a couple of years ago, LFP, it's like, yeah, right. You know, that's old school. Why would we want to have that? But it's been interesting in the last 12 months or so how there's really been a global pivot in realizing the attributes of LFP and the ability to actually enhance that technology. It's one of the safest chemistries that's out there. And as we all know, it does not contain cobalt or nickel, thank goodness. And so in terms of sourcing locally, it makes it much, much easier on that. Also, the lifespan is a very important aspect of this. When you have cells that are able to last up to 30 years, 10,000 life cycles plus, from an ESG perspective, that's a very, very encouraging thing. Next slide. And I guess that's it for right now. Thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you, Paul. And thank you so much, everyone. I think this was a really, a great really start of this panel in some way, but also I think a really fantastic overview, looking really, on some of the, the challenges and some of the demand topic, how we can really get all this, supply in place, and then see some of the challenges also from a, minerals perspective, how we can still scale this up in a sustainable way, and then see two approaches, essentially, one in Italy and one in the US, on how can these, gigafactories, new players also enter the market and help, to ramp up this capacity. I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions, and we're going to have quite a few also, once we stop the live stream. Just before, I think we are about to close the live stream, I will quickly raise one question, or kind of two questions for Christy, which came up by actually one of our alumni. But before I do that, I just maybe the closing round for the live stream, what I would like to do is, there's any takeaways from each of you, Rebecca, Paul, Christy, and Lars, work in this industry, anything you can share with, really international, global, diverse audience, anything if they want to get into the market or want to have play a bigger role in that space. Is any learnings, anything you would like to pass on? That would be fantastic. So I'm already saying it now, so you can think about this for a second. But Christy, for you, I'm going to have already the question here. And the kind of two questions for Mark Strauss, one of our alumni, was, do auditing reports from a mine in DRC have the same certainty as auditing reports from a mine in Canada? And then the second question kind of was talking more about the China company involved with Irma, since they refine most of the battery materials and manufacturing. So I think one question was about China, and the second about, how, what's about this auditing reports, the certainty, example, DRC versus Canada.
I'll share some takeaways, and then after that round, I'm happy to go into answering those questions. I think, there are so many trends that I could share about that we're really focused on at IRMA. But the core part of our system that is so important to us and to improving standards of how minerals are developed for batteries and other sectors, and the idea of the value of verification and certification is really engaging across sectors. That one of the values of the IRMA standard is our multi-stakeholder governance, that we do have civil society and labor unions working alongside and with an equal voice to mining companies, investors, and purchasing companies. And I encourage you, as you're considering what types of standards to integrate, what processes to engage in, to really look for multi-stakeholder governance, a detailed standard, and mine site level independent third-party audits with public reporting. So you have my contact information in the chat, and if you do have to jump off before the Q&A, please reach out, and I'm happy to talk more about the standard and really the incredible importance in this transition to EVs, to renewable energy systems. We have to get things right from the mine site to the end use to have a just transition.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Christy. Who would like to go next? Paul?
Takeaways from this is that I think it's extremely important that we have a collaborative perspective on what we're doing truly on a global basis, and also have transparency. As Christy has just alluded to, having a chain of custody is very, very important, and not just from an ESG perspective. If you look at it truly just from a business perspective on that, it provides more data. More data allows you to make better decisions in the marketplace as well too. So this is generational in terms of what we're doing. It's been over 100 years since we've had an opportunity to really transition an entire world into a more renewable, more sustainable environment with this. Every country should indeed have their ability to be a standalone and to be able to not only create, but store, but also deploy their own energy all the way down to an individual level.
Fantastic. Thank you. Rebecca, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the thing we haven't spoken about is the recycling end and the end of life, because when you're considering making these batteries and you're mining new material, and obviously I consult the mining sector for the most part, over time we actually change the structure of those industries into a secondary market. So go away and study the lead market. I mean, 80% of the lead market is now recycled, closed loop. It still has its environmental challenges. It's definitely not clean from a purely objective point of view, but it's much cleaner than it would be if that material went to landfill or escaped back out of the chain. So it's a material in use, and it will also in the end up in, I believe, in stationary energy storage. So that's one side of it. The other is, I think, we look at these gigafactories and who's paying for them and where the materials are coming from. It's quite a change in the structure of the industry from automotive guys being people who just put parts together. And they really were supply chain experts on buying in other people's parts and operating that final, very complicated assembly. And now you're getting a place where their money is being placed in investments in their supply chain to a much greater extent than you saw before. And that really starts to raise question about who owns these batteries in the long term. Who's going to be the final person who does guarantee that a battery is collected, known what it is, and then finally recycled. So you end up with a much more interesting story if you start to think through who ultimately owns these battery cells and who is responsible for them. Because I think that changes dramatically from what we've seen before, where an automaker bought in, put together, and then sold on to the consumer. I don't believe we'll see that in this EV world. I think that chain of responsibility will be a lot stronger. So a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing up so much. And we spoke about this also quite a bit in the program. So I think it really resonates with us. Lars, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Rebecca that we also addressing this in our factory. We actually built in a recycling plant within the gigafactory already during this engineering process. And firstly, we'll just recycle our own scrap because there are not enough batteries to recycle really. You're going to see this demand in the next 10 years when you have worn out batteries. And there have been a lot of discussions about second life for these batteries. And I'm not so sure about it. I think the best way is to recycle them and digest the minerals, which is well needed for the industry. I think a second life creates a lot of issues in terms of if you put an EV battery in a storage and become a storage battery later on, who is going to do the warranties if it's caught fire, explodes, or someone get hurt. So it's a difficult task actually. Nevertheless, I would like to say something that also Paul was into. This is the greatest opportunity in 100 years, and I think the social impact we can make with the new green industrialization is significant, and that's something we should embrace and actually change societies in need. Not building gigafactories in metropolitan areas where the need for jobs is also big, huge, but I mean in areas that has been in decline for many years, this is where you should place these industries, where you can actually make a change and bring it back to prosperity. And I think that's the most important mission that we have right now, because it's a very big part of the whole change is to create jobs and create prosperity.
Thank you so much, Lars, and thanks so much, everyone. And now we're going to stop the live stream. And thank you so much for all the questions. Keep them coming. We might also tag some of our panelists. Maybe they can also give some answers directly on the LinkedIn chats. But yeah, for now, we're going to stop the live stream. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining that part.